All right, I am so pleased to have everyone who is joined today to learn about how you can complete a technology audit or at least get started in your organization. It's a pleasure to be here and to lead this workshop with everyone. If you scroll down within your session preview, you can see near the bottom a link to view collaborative notes. Hopefully you've already taken advantage of that within the other sessions that you're attending. From those collaborative notes, you can see a link to see the slides as well as a PDF of the slides and some of the resources that we'll be using later. If you're like me, when you attend sessions and you're probably wanting to peek ahead, I'll also walk through the tech audit resources as I go through the presentation, but those are available for you if you want to kind of skip ahead and see what it is that we'll be talking about. So let's get started. So who am I? I'm Jenna Dillette. Hello from Southern Colorado. I'm in Alamosa, and I work for Skvare. We are a technology consulting company that works with nonprofits, membership associations, and I like to say that I like people and I happen to work with software, and I think that really is the case. I found myself kind of surprised at sometimes on what side of the table I'm on, because I really do like people, and I think that's going to come up again and again as we go through today's content. So a little bit about Skvare. Our motto is that we help others, and we do that with their technology strategy. We do hosting and maintenance, providing ongoing support, custom development, outbound mail services, and we focus on these specific software, mostly open source, Drupal, CiviCRM, Lime Survey, as well as some proprietary systems like Salesforce. So that's who we are. But more interestingly, and more important, who are you? You may be solo in your organization and managing everything in-house and on your own, or you may be new to your role and figuring out what tools you have, or you're missing your old tools and you're new to your role and you liked your previous systems at a previous job better, or you're established in what you're doing and the people around you are pushing for change. Maybe you don't want change, you're satisfied with what you have. Whatever it is that you're coming to the table with, whatever size of organization you are from, doesn't matter. What we go through today can be relevant for everyone. And what I want everyone to remember this whole time, and refer back to the slides that you can link to in the collaborative notes, is what technology is. And that is that technology is a mirror. And what it does, it can reveal your broken processes and workflows. And a good tool backed by the right process and people is a superpower. And so I want everyone who's attending to just hold on to that technology is a mirror. And hopefully as we go through some of the tips for how you can get the most out of the systems that you have, or change systems if you need to, you're having that in mind, that you're not making a change for change's sake, but you're making a change because you've learned something when you've held up that mirror. So there's a few other reasons why this matters, and that's because, time is money, as they say, and relationships take time, and relationships are what fuel the work of what you do, whether that's partnership, whether that's individuals, whether that's clients, and the security of everything that you're tracking and holding in your systems really does matter, because you have information about live animals. Maybe you actually work with animals and it truly is dogs and cats or humans. It doesn't matter. But it's information about real creatures. And you also have the power to choose. There's no reason to ever feel like you're stuck in the systems that you have, the processes that you have, even your team. You know that members of your team are always changing. And as a reminder, I will occasionally sort of pause. I'm not frozen. Hopefully I won't actually freeze. But what I'll be looking at is just kind of scrolling through the chat just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. So, and I love seeing some other folks in chat who provide as part of their services tech audits. And so even the way, Cindy, shout out to you to potentially pull additional resources to supplement or whatever perspective folks are coming with. So, okay. The learning objectives. This is on kind of the home page of what it is that we're going to be uncovering. Some of this is just pinpointing ways that you can improve. What should a machine do versus what should a human do? And how can you do some of that with the tools that you already have? How can you manage and plan for change? And change doesn't mean new systems. Change could be a new process with a current system. And how can you get more with your time and money with the investments that your organization has already made? Because tech is not just one thing. And we're going to put a lot on the table here. And I want to remind people that just like that mirror, the biggest magic that all of us have, whether at work or at home, is sometimes our ability to ask questions and be curious and be open, because all of this is about change. Okay, so who is at the table? And this is not who is here. This is, you are now in your organization and you are ready to launch into a technology audit. And it's important to look around to see who is at the table, which answering this question could be its entirely own session. And there probably is a session happening at some point over the next few days about internal relationship building and team management and communication. And part of this is, do others know that you are completing an evaluation, or you are interested in completing evaluation? Or is it leadership or your supervisor that is wanting some sort of change? What is the motivator for you being here, and also the motivation that you're going to take back with you for however and whatever your role is in kind of leading the charge to make this useful with what your organization is doing? And this question matters because picking the leader for what you do is, I think, the most critical thing. So there's a lot that consultants can do a really good job of, and there's other things that consultants do that isn't unique to us as consultants. And one thing that as a consultant, I feel really privileged of getting to observe is the difference between performance of organizations and what is it that seems to make one organization so much more organized or so much more strategic than another organization. And the main difference that I've been seeing is that those organizations who have some sort of internal ownership of their technology are then going to have better outcomes when they have technology initiatives. So the size and scale of your organization may mean that it is never going to make sense for you to have a digital projects coordinator, just thinking from a role perspective of kind of what that position is and what that person would do. That you may be of a small enough size that you're just not going to have the capacity to ever make that sort of hire. That doesn't mean that kind of the responsibilities of what kind of a digital projects coordinator or project manager or IT director or a technology director, the job titles can abound in terms of what that person on the team would be doing, but there's a lot of what could be done that can be owned or shared by other members of your team. And I think it's picking that right person and knowing who that person is going to determine a lot about the success of what's ahead of you. And so I've listed out some of the key things to kind of get started with. And this is thinking of an evaluation of who your folks are that could be involved in this. So let's say you have five different current team members that you think could be involved in this, or maybe you have three, or maybe you have the one person of whether or not they want to, this is what they're going to do. These are some important considerations and some thinking to do about those folks or about yourself if this is something you're wanting to take on in order to kind of look ahead into the future to see the potential risks or the potential challenges that may come up in completing this process. Some of those are how are they involved already? So have they been able to recognize the skills, talents, and knowledge in others around them? Do they naturally seek a challenge? Are they someone who naturally asks questions? Can they explain themselves well? And is that something that's equal in both written communications or verbal communications? How well do they explain themselves? And are they doing things already to help their coworkers succeed? And have they already tried to improve workflows or procedures and processes internally? You'll see that all of those questions, none of those actually relate to technology. It's important to also put on the table, do they feel comfortable with technology? Because if they don't, then having them kind of lead the charge in coordinating and tracking the details of what an audit could look like internally, well, that's going to fail if the person is naturally not comfortable with technology. But there is a lot of kind of skills and assets internally to a person that is just as important, if not more important, than their specific comfort with the tool. And so picking that leader and doing that evaluation of who it is that's going to lead the charge makes a big difference. I know that with some organizations we work with, and a big shout out, I get to work with the International Mountain Bicycling Association, and they are of a size that they did make that strategic decision a couple years ago to hire a digital projects coordinator. And I can tell the night and day difference between I think of it as the value of their dollar. So if they spend 1 hour of time with us, we provide just even 1 hour of consulting service, the value that has and the impact that it can have in their organization in comparison to before. And that's because that there's someone who's coordinating, who's owning the details and communicating with the rest of the team. So I really mean it. Pick your leader and do your analysis internally to know who is going to be at the table as part of this process. And you can do this as an assessment. This is one of the links within the, if we look here at the tech audit resources, this is the first one of auditing leadership, the way that think in tables, right? That's a trick to stay organized. How can you put something in a table? How can you put metrics in it to then measure? So if you have multiple team members that you're considering that could be involved in some way, then think about those different elements that we talked about, of that they are actively involved or engaged, that they seek challenges, that they can communicate, that they help others succeed. Are they trusted by their team members? Because if they're not trusted, well, having them ask a bunch of questions or getting the feedback from others is probably not going to be very effective. And so what are the results of your process? And part of, to kind of back up to what could have been in my introduction, part of the value of doing what you can on your side to complete a tech audit is to play the role in some ways of what a consultant's service would do for you. But the other benefit is that anytime you're going to pay for services from a technology agency, whatever those services are, you're going to be that much more prepared and also get a much greater value from it if you even ask a few of the questions that we're going through today on the table. So I think of it as healthy tension that you are creating just because of your ability and interest in putting questions on the table and doing what you can to potentially answer those internally, and not expect or think that someone else is always more uniquely suited or going to be naturally better at answering them. So, and what that links to is kind of who owns your technology or your strategy. And I don't mean in the sense of proprietary systems versus open source. I mean kind of who owns the use of your technology. And that if you don't have that leader, and that leader doesn't have to have a huge amount of authority even, but if it's known that there's a point person, if you don't have that leader, whoever you may engage or hire to complete a technology audit will be hindered in bringing their full value to the table. So in short, you'll probably be needing to spend the same amount as you did before, whether that's time or actual dollars or whatever that spend looks like, but you're not going to get the full value of what those dollars, those hours, those minutes would add up to be without engaging in some of these questions. So in short, do you have the right people on your bus? And maybe you do, but are they in the right seat? And so this is the big step one, that we're not talking about anything related to technology, that technology is a mirror, technology is a tool, and that it's humans that are the ones that successfully use tools, whatever the tool is. So let's get started on some resources. The first, which seems completely random, but I was thinking about it as I was putting the presentation together, is a really recent article in the New Yorker from Ann Patchett, where she just writes about purging things, getting rid of stuff. And there was this great passage about how she was finding all these champagne glasses, which you can see just copy and pasted from the article, the snippet I was thinking about of that. She imagined that at some point 12 people would be in her house wanting champagne. Like, is that really going to happen? And I think of what an audit process is of your systems is that kind of purge where you're opening up cabinets, you're opening up these digital cabinets, and you're finding a bunch of champagne glasses, and you're wondering, why do I have all of these? when am I ever going to have this party? Or when am I ever going to have this campaign that requires me to collect this information? Or all of this is out of date, or these bowls are broken. I mean, there's a lot of relevance. If any of you are like what I'm going through right now, of when we spend a lot more time in our houses, then we also do a lot more cleaning up of our houses. And so we're doing that with our systems, just like you may be doing that at home in your closets. So if you want to kick afterwards, just read that article because it's a hoot. It's a great out loud read too, but let's clean up the champagne glasses. And now I want to kind of distinguish between the type of auditing that can be done. And there's sort of a different approach that we can take for each of them. And even though we're going to decide what's on the table, the reminder again that it's also who's in the chair. So thinking back to if you have the right people on the bus, if the people on the bus are in the right seat, hopefully we've established that you have your tool in order to do a really simple, quick matrix of skills and what folks are bringing to the table to know, and to decide what it is that you want to evaluate first. I think some good approaches to decide what it is that you're wanting to evaluate is maybe look at your budget. Where are you spending money? If you could spend that money any differently, then would that be a motivator for you? Sometimes money does drive where we put our attention. Or have you been getting complaints from your team members about the way something is working? Or is there a campaign or something coming up, a change ahead for your organization that is necessitating that you put some questions on the table? So getting a sense of where you want to start is important. And no matter where you start, the purpose of what we're doing is getting on the balcony. So I like this idea of kind of this mental visual of, okay, if I remove myself from the presence and I get up on the balcony to look down at the situation, that's naturally going to change the way I'm looking at the situation and what I can consider as an option. And another thing that you can do from your view on the balcony, and that you can do through all of NTC and really all of life, is that you can rent the ideas that we're talking about here. That doesn't mean you actually have to buy any of them. So hopefully you can take some tools, you can take a perspective, you can think of things as an experiment instead of something that once you commit, you're all in, that rent it, you don't have to buy it yet. And so we're going to start first off with doing a website audit. And again, the purpose of this is thinking of tools and ways that your team internally can own things that often external consultants are hired to do. And as someone who does these exact sort of audits for organizations, I feel like I really know where I do bring something unique to the table from that ability of having done so many of the same type of thing or seen so many variations of how organizations do their work. But there's also a lot of what I do that I know is not unique to me, and get a good tool, be willing to ask questions, and you can do it yourself. So part of a website audit is understanding what your digital landscape is. And I love the visuals for this. And often the visuals are pointing back to your website. And so that's why we're going to look specifically at your website, and that your website is often your hub. When you think of communication, marketing, presence online, it's typically always a website, and that there's other avenues, other venues that you are also part of, and that those venues are interacting in some way with the website, but often as a kind of a secondary or supplemental. And so some of the questions to have on the table related to website audit is to kind of back up and to think about why you have a website. And that may seem like a superfluous, or you don't have time to ask that kind of question, but I like to have it as an exercise. And it's the same sort of exercise, even if you're completing a website redesign, that the tools still apply, is understanding and documenting what your online strategy objectives are. And so I would encourage this process to be completed where you are not tempted to actually pull up and look at your website. Instead, complete this with the team with whoever is going to be part of this process, perhaps intentionally bringing multiple people to the table that may not be part of the process long term, but are important to have as part of the process now, to just document what those online strategy objectives are. Who are your target audiences that you're trying to speak to? And those target audiences are likely going to be different than the target audiences of your overall objective as an organization, what your mission is, what your strategic objectives are of your organization. That is going to be different than what your online objectives are going to be. And your target audience for your online community and your online engagement is likely not a one-to-one match for what your overall organization objective or your organizational audiences are. Then what are the desired actions that you want individuals to take? And one really powerful thing with lists is to decide whether or not priority matters. And so for your desired actions taken and your target audiences, it's really important for those to be itemized based on order of priority. And so within the Tech Audit Resources tab, you can have the website audit. It's very simple. It's very simple to use. And you can see what should be put into an order. Like, where does order matter versus where can I just put something in a bullet list? And the value of putting something for the desired actions taken in a bulleted list, that means that you need to declare what is the most important thing that a person is doing. If we could only have one call to action, what would it be? And if you have multiple that have to be that number one, that can also be a trigger to think about the different space. Perhaps, I know from a website perspective, that's when organizations may get into kind of a multi-site situation where they have websites that are speaking to specific audiences because the actions that they're wanting those audiences to take are different enough that they would be in conflict or they would compete with each other if you tried to put them in the same space. And so the order and priority, I think, really matters here for you to determine what it is. What sort of actions do you want your audience to take online? And again, do this not by looking at your website. This is part of why it's an audit. Do this by looking at their website to then define what you think is most important, because basically what we're developing with this process is a way to measure, right? Kind of to create a stick and determine a length in order to then measure how well you're doing it. And I see a comment from Amy, which is so true, about it's hard to look critically at systems you've spent a lot of time on and with. And that's why there's this perspective change, and is sitting at the table and not having that browser open of what your website is right now, and kind of those checks for everyone who's at the table to try to keep that broader awareness of opportunity of what you want to do. Because again, a lot of this is exactly why people hire an external someone who doesn't have eyes on the system at all time. So even if you only are partially answering this, all of this can just make you more ready for those conversations with answers, and therefore just get a better value out of what that entity, that partner, may bring to the table. So after desired actions, thinking about what your programmatic priorities are and how those have shifted or have not shifted, and then also what your platform integrations are. And so when we think about other platforms, at this point, it's important to not necessarily care about what the state of integration is with your website, but just reminding yourself and listing them out, what they are, because that's the sort of fresh perspective. Because sometimes if it's not approached in that way, then there's things that are left off the table. Okay, so a reminder about digital strategy, and that's a whole other thing. And I want to make sure that folks don't feel intimidated or get bogged down depending on how formalized or not your digital strategy is. And you should have some great resources here at Intent to have that as a focus, to specifically develop a digital strategy. That is not the purpose of what we're doing here. Rather, we want to find some point of starting for you. Some point, which is why the resources are as simple and straightforward as they are, that because you are staring at your same systems all the time and it's hard to have that fresh perspective, the tools should be simple and straightforward for you to use. But there's a lot that can be done in terms of defining a digital strategy. I think that it could be easy to get bogged down there without focusing on kind of the low-hanging fruits of looking at, say, what your desired actions taken can be to then use as a measuring stick against what you have in your system. So here's an example of an organization that I previously worked with where we completed this sort of website audit, and noting that I was someone who was external in this case, right? This is not an organization that I was uniquely working for and living and breathing in their system every single day, as would be the case of what the purpose of hopefully what people can take away from this training. But their online strategy objectives, pretty straightforward: increase awareness, bring in new applications, raise funds for programs. Their target audiences, itemized out in detail who those folks would be. And in particular, thinking about, get specific about donors. Donors is so vague. What type of donors? What are the demographics or similarities about the groupings of how you define who your donors are, and then how those different groupings would then interact or have expectations of your system. And then thinking about the desired actions. Their number one was to become a donor or a sponsor. Number two was to apply. Number three was connect in some way. Number four was to stay in touch with, in their case, with email news. So it's not a lot to, these are probably 90% of the same sorts of actions that you may have, or you may want your community to take. Maybe the order is different. And so now with this, there is a way to have kind of that stick, that measuring stick, to then look at the system to see how well are we doing? Can we do that? And then all of a sudden it may make sense to talk to your web developer or get that skilled volunteer who happens to know about WordPress or whatever your website platform is, and make some changes. Because the purpose of an audit is to confirm what your strategy is, that you're on the right track, or have a way to know where you need to make change. And for that to be actionable. This is not an exercise for the sake of doing exercise. So take all of this as a way to then create a plan from, and then engage in those resources, engage in those other staff members that may not have been at the table to define the actions, but they can be part of a solution based on what you're seeing is different from what you want versus what your system is providing. So we talked about this. You have your stick, and now you can measure it. The next process is a CRM audit. And I really, really love these. Because I just think that they're so valuable. And the way to do a CRM audit, and the way I'm talking about it, is an audit of your use of your current system. I remember I used to work for a human service organization, and I really, really did not like our CRM system. And I liked it to the point that I did not want to use it. And meaning I was not getting any benefit from it, because I was spending time instead researching other tools and spending time talking to my executive director, and was very kind of pompous in terms of why a change was so important. When in reality, organizations did not even have computers however many years ago, but people were still giving money, people were still showing up for events. And so this idea of that the tool is what solves the problem, that's why technology is a mirror. So in this case, when I look into that mirror, I was someone who was being stubborn, and I could have been putting a lot more information into that platform that would have been valuable for the development director who came after me, in comparison to the spreadsheets that I was maintaining externally and still putting them in these shared folders. But shared folders can get lost. Excel spreadsheets can get lost. But something that is your organization's CRM system, hopefully that's not ever going to get lost. That would be a significant data breach if it did. And so the person who is going to lead this is someone, if you're doing this internally, and I think that there's ways that you can do this internally, which is what we're going to talk about, then they really do need to be trusted and looked upon with respect by other coworkers. And that when you do an evaluation like this, then you're not coming with strong opinions. So when I lead this process with any organizations I work with, then my goal is to just understand, how are you using your existing system? Because often if you were to ask the question, what 3 things, if changed, would make doing your job more straightforward? That's a really difficult question. I mean, people sort of know that answer, but you also know how to do your job because that's how you do it. It's a different sort of stretch sometimes to be able to understand how your job could be better. Maybe you just know that it could, that something could improve with your process, but you don't know what it is. And so instead of expecting everybody on the team to be able to come with you with those 3 things, having someone on the team who knows the system the best, go around and spend a little bit of intentional time, even if it's just 30 minutes at a time, to get to know, hey, how do you use this system? Or which systems do you even use? And this is where that sort of coordinator role, or someone who can act as a even temporary coordinator to collect this information, can be so valuable. So which systems do you use? How do you use those systems? This is just an information collection and not something that's a theory exercise, but something where you're really pulling up the chair and sitting next to them to see exactly what it is, or having them share their screen to see how they complete their process. And part of what this can show is what areas of the system do they use most often, or what areas of a system do they only occasionally use. So the CRM systems that we work in, there's an email area, there's contact management, there's email communications, there's memberships, there's campaigns, there's reports, there's all the searching capability, creating groups. And for different departments or different teams within an organization, maybe this team uses 3, another team uses 2, and it's a big, messy Venn diagram. And so everybody using different elements of the system in order to complete the unique nature of what it is that they're responsible for. So after you know, in general, the system or systems that they use and which parts of them they use most frequently, doing some review of how it is that they do their job. So if you're the one who's most familiar with the system, in the organization, even having them walk you through what their process is to complete some of their most regular tasks, or tasks that they sometimes get hung up on. So, for example, maybe there's a new donor. How would you create a donor in your system? Can you show me what that looks like? Show me, it looks like you have some paper checks from donations that recently came in. How do you log those in the system? How do you find your event participants? We have this event coming up. Can you show me how you find your event participants? And that's why I can't say enough the importance of trust in this process, because it's important for that person to communicate that no one is being judged, that the purpose of an audit is to know where there's places that there could be improvement, and that part of this, the end result, can be better training, better customization, changes to the system, shifting and support of roles so everyone can have access to and more easily do what they're supposed to be doing. And so I think that's why I can't articulate enough, as a person who likes people, that the person and the leadership of this process is so critical to have the right person to do it. Otherwise, it really will fail. But that I think that the questions that we're asking here, there's nothing unique. I know that is something that I, as a consultant, can do. That there's a lot of this that you can absolutely own internally, especially if you have that one person who, whether or not it's even in their job description, but they happen to just really get it. They really like software, they really like technology in general, and have kind of made themselves into the de facto point person, even though that's not at all in part of their job description. That person's really valuable, and it can be really valuable in this type of review. And so pull up that chair, do a screen share, whatever it is, to do that kind of motivational interviewing to just understand how people are using their system. And part of that is, I think about nursing, and my sister is an ER nurse. And when she was in college, then she had a professor who was talking to, her and all of her fellow nursing students about just never settle, that if you're bored or you don't like the type of nursing you're in, there's so many other types of nursing, just, get a different job. And I think about that with technology, that technology is not just one thing, and there are so many tools available, but you should at least start with the one that you have. There's always going to be something that seems shinier or better. And also folks in sales who work for all different kinds of software are really good at their job normally and are going to have a lot of good pitches for why you should make that change. But if you don't understand what it is that you need first, which is doing that audit of how are you using your existing system, How well are your team engaging the training resources that are already available to them? If you are investigating the potential of making a massive CRM overhaul or website overhaul or whatever it is, but you have that as an established culture in your organization, you can't pretend to be surprised then, or I would encourage you to check any surprise if you find that people are not engaging with their new training resources, if they weren't engaging with their old training resources. And so just thinking about never settling is to remember that, one, you always have more options than the tools that you have. But two, never settle can also apply to the systems that you have, that it's very likely that those systems can do a lot more than they are for you right now. And also we went to space without iPhones. And so I just, history is important. And especially working in technology, I like to remind myself of all that was possible in the world before we have the tools that we have, and we were still forming relationships, and to not get caught up on there being something that's perfect, or that even your existing system is going to be perfect, but that the purpose of an audit is to identify what is most important to focus on. Where can we make the most headway first in order to then get the most of the investment that's been made. So the next type of review that you can take a look at is a data audit. And this one, I like it more for the purposes and the questions of it. I like it more for the purposes of the way it can interweave into how you're looking at your website and how you're looking at your CRM system. And the first thing to start looking at, I'm going to pause. Yeah, that's great. That's great, Martha. Thanks for adding that comment, is looking at the types of expenses that exist. And this is another exercise of just putting stuff on the table, and taking the time to write it out. Of where do you have licenses? What's the renewal period for those licenses? Who is your hosting provider? What is all hosted together? What is hosted separately? Who can make changes to that? What control do you have in making changes in your system? So thinking about customizations, or how much control do you have over your website or your CRM system? And maybe you don't even need to make changes right now, but just knowing in general, the general answer to who could you go to? And maybe it's a quick answer of you can't make anything. You just change content on these 4 pages, and everything else you contact Joe for, or whoever that is. Other expenses of, if you are making a change, then there's going to be data migration, and you probably have a lot of places that data is living. And this is where I like to think about the hidden spreadsheets of that, and which I think is so valuable when you're asking questions. That if I go here in the CRM audit, thinking of staff interviews, so this is sort of a template that you can use of who are you talking with? What's their role? With their role, what are their responsibilities? What system or systems do they use most? And then how do they use each of those systems? And, long form, I find myself that I'm more often a paragraph writer than a table thinker. I don't know about everybody on this call, but we all sort of think in different ways. And I think with punctuation. And so it can be a challenge for me to force myself into table thinking, but there's a big value in that, in the way, especially when you are taking information from multiple parties together and putting it. So what it ends up providing for you is, with, let's say you talk to 5 different team members and you have them show you the way they use the system. And an important note too, you're not in real time saying, did you know you can do this? Like, you really want to separate and just collect the information, and then schedule the follow-up to come back in case you happen to know a whole bunch of shortcuts or tricks or features that the system has that they may not know about. This is not the time for training. This is the time for collection and just understanding the way that your team is using your tools. What that will provide you is understanding where the pain points are, and understanding where the pain points are the same or different across your team, which can then translate into training opportunities that your team should have. This doesn't mean that you are the one, or anyone internally to your organization is uniquely suited to provide that training. But you can I think we could all do better with deduplication management. And I don't know how we could do better, but this seems like everybody's confused about that. That's when you go to whoever that partner is that you're working with, to then see about what resources are available. Or Google can be a partner too, depending on the kind of CRM system you're in and the sorts of resources that can exist. And then you can also see opportunities for system improvement. If we had this function, that could save all of this time for this other person. If maybe that's where when you see the manual work of a team member and see them entering information in your event management system and then entering information in your contact management system, because maybe they're not the same system, depending on what that process looks like, the frequency of how often that process needs to be done, that can be a very valuable justification in order to, can the two go together? Can your contact management also be event management? Does your event system allow for contact management too? Can the two connect and speak to each other in some way to avoid the duplication of time of entering the same kind of information? And so this is a template that you can use in that sort of interviews that either you or someone else on your team are leading with other team members. So that, I'm glad I went back to that, but now I'm going to remind myself where I was. So we talked about space and we were jumping into data audits. All right. Okay, so all the expenses on the table, and it was customization that had me go back down the rabbit hole of CRM audit and data migrations. So we were talking about the way that can bring up trainings and the expenses of trainings, or ongoing support when you have those one-off questions that you need answered. Who is going to answer them? Is that someone internally that's going to answer them? That still is money, that's staff time. Or is that your technology partner that's answering those questions with some sort of service level agreement that you have with them? A lot of this has been about software, but remember there's also hardware expenses, right? So maybe you have old tech and the disposal or recycling of that tech, or like we talked about, staff time. That's very relevant in the management of old hardware or management of old software. And then the opportunity cost of what it costs when you don't make a change. And so ROI is, you can understand that when you understand your expenses, and whether you're sitting with your accountant, whether you're just itemizing all of the systems that you're using, there's a lot more kind of fees typically that add up than what you'll expect when you do an evaluation of sort of every piece of information that you're holding. So powerful questions. What kinds of questions are we looking at if you start from kind of a data perspective? And I like a lot of these questions more as a way to supplement how you're looking at either the website or looking at a CRM system. I think that trying to do a data audit more on its own as a standalone it can be easier to get lost in the weeds, especially because these are the weeds that you're in every single day. And the comment earlier from someone about it's hard to have that fresh perspective when you're using these systems all the time. That's why I think these are powerful questions that can often be used elsewhere. So where are you collecting data? I mean, this is all of your systems. These are all the paper forms that maybe your different client managers are using. Where do those forms go? Does information in some of those forms get logged into one system or multiple systems? Does information in some of those forms never get logged anywhere and it just stays in the paper version? And where do you already have data? Maybe you have data sources that you're no longer updating, but you still have them for a specific purpose. What is the purpose of those? And a lot of this is kind of getting rid of those champagne glasses, right? Of why am I holding on to this? Why am I still keeping this? We're not doing anything with this, or I can't even trust this data. This wouldn't be useful for me if we had a campaign and I needed to segment my community and target this in order to send out an invite to a virtual event that we're having. And so doing that data collection, I think, is a different way of sort of cleaning house that is more about your internal shared drives often than your CRM systems, because this is the proliferation of people taking information out of those systems because they may need to do that in order to complete the reporting or evaluation or review that they think they need to do, or they're taking it out of the system because they don't know that the system could actually do what it is that they are, that they're wanting to do externally. And I like that Amy's pointing out that there was a session this morning that looks like could be really valuable for folks to return to, and that there's a benefit too that all of these are being recorded. And so that means that if you weren't able to attend something, you can always go back and watch the recording. And so any other shout outs of topics that are coming up while we're doing this session that remind folks of previous sessions that you've already been part of, or sessions that are up ahead that you think would be valuable, put those in comments in chat. And so you can read through here all the data questions. I don't need to read them out loud for you, but hopefully you can get a sense of how this really starts to have you sweep away the dust of things that you have filed away that may be of no use to anybody, but there's that fear of deleting it. So within CRM systems, for example, I like the example of groups. And so there's often a proliferation of creating groups, and that even having in the group name temp, for temporary, and then you have just so many temporary groups. And so with CRM systems, and I will work with organizations to develop some sort of internal protocol for the way that they're going to name their groups, and the descriptions that they're going to give those groups. So there can be some sort of accountability in the future to delete them. and because there can be true performance issues. I mean, I know that I work with some organizations that they truly have thousands of groups in their CRM system. And there's this fear of, I don't want to delete it. Like, I love Amy pointing out, deleting things is terrifying, or there's this idea in some CRM systems that there's a delete and then delete permanently. So it's like, we like to joke about the trash can actually being an archive, like that as long as you get to search within your archive, which is your trash can digitally, then maybe I can delete things. But there's a lot of questions related to, do people know the data that you collect about them? And do you know what you do with it? And do you know how to give it back? I like the reference in chat about GDPR. If you even have, I think it's technically, and someone correct me in chat if I'm wrong, but I think in terms of who is legally bound by that, is if you even have kind of that one contact who is in the EU, then technically you're sort of, you need to abide by those rules. But we also have our own local state rules. California, I mean, there's all kinds of rules that if they're not already passed, they are likely to be in the future about privacy and data protection. And so these questions do matter. And so kind of that fear of deleting, if you're not knowing what to do with it anyways, and no one within your organization knows what to do with it, then it's okay to say goodbye. And that, especially if those folks have not been engaged, you're not actually losing anything. You're creating an opportunity. You're opening a window, like let the bird fly away, whatever analogies would be better fit. So like I was joking earlier about, maybe your brain works in tables, maybe it works in paragraphs, maybe you need punctuation, maybe you don't. But this is another opportunity to think in tables of the way that you can organize these questions, all these powerful questions, and review all of those internal shared documents, or those documents that are uniquely on your computer, or all of the groups that you have in your CRM system, or all of the paper forms and all the questions that you're asking on those paper forms that you think you need. But you know what? We're never actually doing anything with this data. Why are we asking this specific question on our form? And that gets to then the privacy for people. So then people can more clearly know the data that you're collecting about them, because you know what data you're collecting about them, and you know where you're collecting it and why, and what systems it's being added into. There's some other great tools. This is classic gap analysis, and there's some links in the resources in order to look at this. This is getting a little further into now that you know the current state of what you have, which is what an audit should help reveal, the current state of what you have, and then identifying what the future state should be, figure out the in-between. And there's a ton of resources that we wouldn't have time to even go through as part of this session that are excellent guides to complete a gap analysis internally if you haven't. But I think that's a very separate process than what this audit is, and may involve very different people at the table than what you've had as part of the process so far. And so you've done your work. You have with your audit, hopefully, a list of kind of those low-hanging items that you can change. Maybe you, from a website audit perspective, you have that list of your desired actions. And it turns out one of those is really missing on your site, or the workflow, kind of that user flow of how your audience completes that specific call to action is just really cumbersome. Or you can tell from your Google Analytics that you're getting a lot of drop off at step 2 of the 3-step process that is needed in order to complete whatever that call to action is. That's where it makes sense for you to spend time and money. That's where it makes sense for you to hire consultation if needed, is to know the actions there. Or from your CRM audit, you see that it's really clear, you talk to 5 people and they all happen to have the same training need. And maybe that was number 1 for one team member and number 4 for another, but you know what? It showed up on all 4. So does anyone internally know how to do that? Or do we need to find resources online? Maybe there's recorded screencasts because of the software that you're using. Maybe your technology partner, this is when they can come in, spend a couple hours with your team, share a screencast that then you can refer back to, that you can add as part of your onboarding materials. That's one thing that I really like about your website. So whatever your website is, it's also a content management system, and your training resources are also content. And so what we like to do is when we have training resources, then we like to create a content type within Drupal, whatever your system is, and make that viewable only to staff, staff users. And so then when they log into the system, they have the training resources about what the system is. And so nothing is getting lost in email or shared drives. And my 3-year-old is wanting to help me with the with the presentation. Does anyone have their 3-year-old attending with them today? The sessions. So training opportunities. You have plenty of ways of getting that, and whatever your method of getting it, have a way to review what was shared with you by your technology partner or whoever it was. So getting back to kind of those, our final steps is, now that you're preparing for change, is just confirming that you still have buy-in. So you needed it from the beginning in order to even complete this process, but you need to confirm that you still have it because you have change now, and who those stakeholders are, who the departments or team members are that are going to be affected, folks from the community that can be involved, leadership that can be a champion of it, who's going to find dollars, having this as a capital expense versus just ongoing maintenance expense. So confirming that you still have buy-in and who you have buy-in from. And I think confirming is so important instead of getting, because you needed buy-in at the very beginning, which is why we talked about people first. So you have your resources. You have those really, really simple templates to use. And I hope that the simplicity of them makes them something that you really can refer to. I love the website audit process and the CRM audit, because the way, whether you're wanting to make even minor improvements to your existing system, or you're wanting to do a complete overhaul, there's a lot of work that if you just go through and kind of just fill it out for your organization, for what you want to have now, and use that as a measuring stick against what you see online, then that's where the most value is going to come. And that's where it's going to be worth additional time and investigation. Don't try to throw up everything in the air and expect that you can do everything at once. That's not going to be sustainable or really work long-term. So with that, if you have any additional questions, then you have my contact information in the conference app area, and it's also within the collaboration notes. It's here. If there's follow-up questions, I've seen a lot of great comments from folks who've attended who are also working in this space or have experienced this before. And I love the chat about people and the realities of what it means to delete and the way in order to have a backup. So maybe you have your CSV backup, and then at some point you can even delete the CSV file because you don't even need that. But there's ways where you can do light deleting without being permanent, but still really engage that process of sweeping the floor, sweeping out your filing cabinets. So I hope that you can get some use out of some of these. And I encourage the very first is to even just look around your team. Who do you have within the team, because I think that's going to be the biggest success of what you can potentially do internally as an organization. Because if you don't really have the people in the right seat, then that can be where it's really valuable to hire someone. And Jennifer is asking if it would be possible to go back to the slide under the web audit that has a diagram with the org website. Absolutely. That's a great slide. It is this one. Yeah. And it's sort of what is feeding which platform. Is it a two-way street? Is it a one-way street? What platforms are you engaged in? What sort of marketing promotion are you doing? And I always typically like to start, like I was saying, from the website audit perspective, because often that's the hub. Yeah. And I can share the link in chat. Folks should be able to see it from their resource documents, but this is the Google spreadsheet for the docs. For Google Slides, we've got either the Google Slides or a PDF of what we're doing, so you can see everything that we've been linking to and talking about. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope that you just get a lot out of all the sessions ahead and are able to take some powerful questions back to your organization. I really do think of that as the biggest gift that we can give to all of those around us, whether it's professional or personal. It's our inquiry and ability to ask powerful questions. And for security audit, we didn't get into as much about security audit in this one. So I'm seeing Andre asking a question about presentations on security audits. At the bottom of the links, you'll also see below the link to the collaboration notes, you'll also see a link to the session evaluation. And so if you want to fill that out real quick before you head out to take a break, join your next session, I know that information is valuable to N10. Great. Archive the graveyard of data. I like that, Vince. Yeah. I'm curious if for anybody who's still online, the reflections on CRM audits internally. And that sort of, do you have someone who can be trusted enough, who isn't too opinionated, who can sit? I know some organizations, and I can think of the team members that they have internally that would absolutely be able to do this. And it's not always the boss at all. It's often that peer who just happens to be good at software and is and can ask questions and collect some basic information to get a head start. Be curious and chat if there's folks who are thinking about that CRM audit, because I know that I'm that recovering opinionated person who did not want to use the tool that I use. And if I would have had someone sit with me and I would show them how I use the tool, and then they kind of share it back of what could be possible in the future, or what we focus on what's possible, that could have a really big impact, I think, on how I would have engaged. It's sort of an attitude check when I think about that version of myself at a younger time. Yeah. So there's folks who you just know that you have a bad CRM system. I think part of a CRM audit also is being able to figure out the nuance of why is it terrible? What is it about your CRM that you really don't like? And then that can be your cleaner bulleted list of what it is that you know that you're going to want out of a CRM system. And again, this is where priority matters. Is it a bulleted list or is it a numbered list? Yeah. Jillian, of just part of the discovery process is just listening to people vent. It's true. That's why there's this unique personality that can somehow take that in without jumping in with their own opinions, because those vented opinions need to be collected in order to get a sense of what your current culture is internally, because that culture is not going to change just because of a software change. If people are having bad attitudes, that bad attitude could be taken in with the new system. And so there's a lot that is learned as part of an audit that um, is not at all about the technology. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And to the point, Jillian's also saying, and sometimes correcting them and saying, you can actually do this in the system now is not at all helpful. That people don't like to be corrected. That's why there's all these soft skills, right? In order to successfully do that. And I think even this process of thinking about how you would do this internally can give that appreciation if you are hiring to have this done externally, to think about the skill set that you're expecting that they bring to the table. Yeah. Looking at Kai's, how the presentation has had her consider taking a step back from their automation list and prioritization to do a formal audit of the CRM. Yeah. I like that, of doing a listening session to gather the pain points. Yeah, that's something that's been hard for me, because I'm a fixer, so I like to jump in, and when I see that someone's like, this is how I navigate to get to my reports. And then I think like, oh, you clicked, 4 things when you could have clicked 1 thing. Then what I've had to remind myself is to not, in that real time, say, oh, you can do this instead, because sometimes there's certain things with people's process that even if they take 4 steps when 1 step is possible, maybe that thing doesn't matter, and just let them click 4 times. But if I can be patient enough to let either the venting or the showing of the poor process, or as I joke with my husband, like watching my husband send a text message, like, oh, it's so slow, start away. Does it really matter? No, it doesn't. But there's are things in part of that process that if we can kind of hold those opinions back and really just be that information harvester, the collector of what's being happening, then all those things that people might not initially verbalize, that stuff comes up, and that's the stuff that's going to be much, much more valuable than the you clicked 4 times when you could have clicked once. Great. Well, I love all these comments here about kind of considerations that folks are having and the perspectives and how that's shifting for everyone with what you already are considering. So thank you for joining. And I hope that you complete the survey and refer back to this if you think this will be useful for anybody else. This recording and session will be up for referring back into the future. Have a great day, all.